Harold Jake's wife wasn't at home on Friday, 22nd of November, 1918, when he left to do a job, so he wrote out a quick note for her, telling her where he was going, which he left at their home at 9 Douglas Street, Parkside, an inner suburb of Adelaide. He packed a few things in a kit bag, and as he did when journeying in the country, took a considerable sum of money with him, and then he set off. He would never see his wife again. Jakes, who was 38, was a street chauffeur, known as Snowy, who had been hired to drive a man from the Grand Coffee Palace in Hindley Street to Crystal Brook, a small country town 180 kilometres north of Adelaide. The man who hired him claimed that he had a sick relative in the town he had to visit. Arthur Jones was driving to Adelaide when he encountered the Talbot coming the other way, at the railway crossing near Roseworthy. Both cars were travelling at about 5 miles per hour, due to a bad patch of road. He wished the driver the time of day, and noticed that the passenger was a man about 30, with a dark complexion and dark hair, in a light-coloured suit. It was the only car he passed on the road. Roughly halfway into the journey, Jake stopped at the home of his brother-in-law, George Pillar, at Tarlee around 7:30 p.m. His nephews, 16-year-old Clarence and 10-year-old Milton, spoke to him, and noticed that there was only one passenger in the car. About 9:15 p.m. the pair reached Clare and spent an hour at the Great Northern Hotel refreshing themselves. Jakes is believed to have reached Port Pirie that night, around 3 a.m. He stayed at the Royal Exchange Hotel and made some money driving groups to Melrose and other places over the weekend. Percival William Budd, alias Bull, a 25-year-old iron worker, who had arrived from New South Wales about 2.5 years earlier, had moved to an address in 2nd Street, Port Pirie, owned by a couple named Brown, on the 24th of November. Budd asked if he could put up a motor garage on the property, and was given permission. The first thing he did was to dig a trench on the 25th of November. He claimed it was an inspection pit for working on the underside of a car. William Brown flippantly commented, "If you go much deeper, you'll strike water." And, "It's too deep. If you go much deeper, you'll be able to bury yourself in it." After dinner on the 25th of November, Budd said he was going to meet a man at 9 p.m. and drive to Crystal Brook. Budd claimed to have purchased Jake's car, a Talbot, for £300 on the Friday night. Jakes, who was known as a shrewd businessman, had been a driver for hire for some years, and would have known that his car, which he had owned since 1915, was worth between £500 and £600, which raised some concerns when it was known. It was only a few months, in fact, since he had knocked back an offer of £500 for the car. Budd said he took possession of the car on Monday. Jakes was due to pick up a man named O'Neill from Crystal Brook on Tuesday morning and drive him to Adelaide. Jakes, however, did not make the return journey to Adelaide, and it was realised he had mysteriously disappeared after he was last seen on Monday night. John Chamberlain, an ironworker, who worked with and lived with Budd until the 15th of November, said that Budd was away from the 16th to the 23rd of November. The two mates met up on the afternoon of the 23rd at a restaurant, and Budd said he'd had a rough ride back to Port Pirie in a Ford car. He afterwards left to go to the Exchange Hotel. The wife of the hotelier remembered Budd calling in to see Jakes. She said he had given his name as Costello. On Monday night at about 10 p.m, Chamberlain saw Budd switching on the lights and starting the motor of a cream-coloured car parked in front of the Exchange Hotel. Harold Jakes was in the driving seat. Budd got inside next to him, and they drove off down David Street. A telegram was sent on the 26th of November to Mrs. Jakes, purportedly from her husband, informing her that he would be home that night. Mrs. Violet Johnston, who lived next door to the Browns, heard a car about 2 a.m. Budd, being an inexperienced driver, hit the fence on the way in. The car was parked in the yard at 5:45 the following morning, and Budd was busy digging in his trench, when Mrs. Gothberg Brown remarked that he was up early. She did not ask him what he was doing, but saw him walking up and down in the trench. The car was parked over the pit, covered in canvas, for a few days, before the garage was erected over it. The inspection pit, which Budd had dug out to a width of 2.5 feet, a length of 6 feet, and depth of 6 feet, was by now only 5 feet deep. Budd stayed home from work on the 4th of December to begin erecting the garage. He was quite busy, in fact. His much-needed inspection pit was by now wholly filled back in. Budd claimed the side had fallen in on the 28th of November as the reason he abandoned the venture. On the 7th of December, the news of Jake's disappearance was published in the Advertiser newspaper. One of the people to read the story was Percy Budd. A motoring accident was discounted as by this time Jakes had been missing 12 days, and had he crashed somewhere would have been found by now. This led to speculation that foul play had occurred. Budd went to the police and showed them the receipt for the sale of the car. He said he had been in Gawler Place when Jakes sought him out and asked if he was looking to buy a car. Budd confirmed he was, and Jake said he had contracted to take another man to Crystal Brook, and that he would take Budd back to Port Pirie to show him the car's abilities. He had then bought the car on Monday night. Jakes drove to Lee's Hotel in Crystal Brook, where he met the other man who had come up from Adelaide. Budd took possession of the car and watched the other two walk away together. On December the 8th, police came to Brown's house and were not satisfied that Budd was the legal owner of the Talbot, and impounded the car. The receipt he had shown them was written out in pen and had spelled Jake's name incorrectly. Over dinner on December the 9th, Budd made the comment that "The shed is there, but the car is gone. It's enough to make a man cry the way they took it out of the yard Sunday night." Olive Brown, daughter of the couple with whom Budd was boarding, had known him for 12 months, and said that Budd had mentioned on the 15th of November that he was going to town, referring to Adelaide, to buy a car soon. Olive had commented when witnessing the trench being dug that it looked like Budd was digging a grave. Detective Tom Matten examined the car at the police station on the 10th of December, and in the back of the car found 2 pieces of rubber which appeared to be stained with clotted blood. On the floor of the car and on a front spring was more congealed blood. Matten then went to question Budd about 9 p.m. He asked to see the clothing Budd was wearing when he returned from Adelaide. Budd showed him a suit on which Matten noticed were multiple small blood spots on the coat, vest and trousers. Budd remarked, "You'll find nothing on those." Matten shot back, "What do you think I'm looking for?" Budd hesitated and said, "I don't know." Matten took possession of the clothing, as well as an automatic revolver and some cartridges which Budd owned. There was also a telegram referring to a motoring accident Budd's parents had suffered. However, they had never been in South Australia. Matten asked if the telegram was a fake to convince Jakes that there had been an injured person at Crystal Brook to visit. Budd denied it. The detective then went to check the shed and noticed that part of the floor was soft and had subsided somewhat. Taken to the station to give a statement, Budd said there was a third man on the trip who was left at the hotel in Crystal Brook. Matten said he believed the car was improperly in Budd's possession, and that he believed Jakes had been murdered, and that he hoped to find the body before noon the next day. Budd simply replied, "I hope you do," before he was arrested for unlawful possession of the car. The next day the police went to the garage and poked the dirt. Finding the soft area, they began digging. Their efforts revealed a kit bag containing a motor lamp and pyjamas, some rugs and a man's hat. Then an iron bludgeon laying on the decomposed remains of Harold Jakes. The body was face down and fluid was running from it. The body was in such a rank state that instead of using the usual horse ambulance, an old buggy was brought in to convey it away. The clothing was searched and sums of money amounting to about £40, several documents and 2 bank passbooks in the name of Jakes were found. Budd was charged with murder. He asked, "What about the other man?" Matten responded, "There was only one man who left Adelaide with Jakes, who said his name was Costello, and I believe him to be identical to you." Budd did not reply. Meanwhile, on the 8th of December, Sissy Jakes gave birth to a son, who was named Sydney Harold Don Jakes. On the 12th of December, the news that her husband's body had been found was related to her. At the inquest held in Port Pirie on the 20th of December, local interest was intense. George Pillar identified the body as that of Harold Jakes. His sons told of seeing their uncle when he pulled up near their father's shop in the main street of Tarlee. Both boys identified the other man in the car as Percival Budd. They were adamant there was no third man in the car. Thomas Amos, another hire car driver, gave evidence that he had spoken with Budd on the 19th of November on North Terrace, Adelaide. Budd had asked him what it would cost to go up to Port Pirie and Port Augusta. Amos replied it depended, but could be as much as £30. Budd then said he was going up wool buying, adding that his father was a big wool buyer in Victoria. Budd was keen to know if the car was Amos's own car and how much it was worth. The two men went and had a drink at the Gresham Hotel. Budd said he was staying at the Coffee Palace and that he was waiting for a telegram from Melbourne before he proceeded. Budd and Amos met again on the 21st of November, and Budd said he had not received the wire yet. Later that day they went to the Majestic Theatre, and afterwards, while walking along King William Street, Budd had asked about another driver. "Who's that little fellow with the Talbot car? They call him Snowy." Amos replied, "That's Harold Jakes." He added, "Jakes is a nice fellow. How do you come to know him?" Budd replied that he didn't know Jakes, but somebody had pointed him out. Budd promised to be in touch with Amos on the 22nd, as they parted company. He did not see his prospective client again until the inquest. It was only then he learnt the man's name. Amos had escaped Jakes' fate because he did not own the car he drove, as Jakes did. Dr. Leach, who had examined the body, told the inquest that the entire left half of the skull had been bashed in. The brain had liquefied and was a chocolate colour, indicating blood. Bone fragments were mixed in. A cartwheel would have needed to have run over the man twice to inflict such damage, he said in answer to a suggestion made by Budd's lawyer. There was also a bruise on the back of the left hand. Death, he said, was caused by extensive injuries to the skull and brain, caused by bludgeoning of the head. A foreman at the smelter where Budd worked stated the bludgeon found with Jakes was a 1-inch thick pipe filled with molten metal and soldered to another pipe used as a handle. He believed a tradesman in ironworking had made it. At the close of the inquest, the coroner committed Budd for trial at Gladstone on the 25th of March, 1919. Interest in the case was so great that the influx of people to observe the proceedings meant that some people could not get hotel rooms, including some of the jurymen, who had to make do with tents in which to sleep. 10,000 words daily were wired from the local telegraph office during the trial. The crush was so great that a picket fence was pushed over and buttons torn off clothing. With all the evidence against him, Budd persisted in his defence that there was a third man who had killed Jakes. He had spent his time awaiting trial by drawing sketches in his cell, including one of a man hanging from a gallows. He pled not guilty. The motive for the murder was simply to gain possession of a car. Budd did not have the money to buy one, so he decided to kill a random car owner to acquire his dream machine. At the close of the 3-day trial, the jury, all of whom were farmers, took less than an hour to pronounce Budd guilty. The judge, Sir George Murray, characterised the crime as cold-blooded and of calculating brutality, before he sentenced Budd to death. Throughout the hearing, Budd had laughed and joked with his jailers. Even after the death sentence, he continued to be mirthful. He was sent to Adelaide Jail to await the execution. He produced a statement in which he tried to pass the blame to his erstwhile mate, John Chamberlain, as the mysterious third man. Although there was no evidence that they were acting together, the rumour and innuendo that resulted was so bad that Chamberlain was forced to take out a warning in the Port Pirie newspaper that he would take legal action against those spreading the slander. At 8 a.m. on the 1st of May 1919, Budd walked unflinchingly to the scaffold and was executed by hanging. His spiritual adviser, the Reverend Dr. Seymour, was not so composed, and fainted at the sight of the man hanging. Seymour had never attended a condemned man before, and stated he had no wish to ever do so again. Not much was known of Budd's background, though it was thought he may have had some Maori ancestry. He told Dr. Seymour that his family had gone to New Zealand when he was young, and that his parents had died about 12 months before, and that he had a brother and a sister living there. After the execution, another prisoner came forward to say that Budd had confessed to acting alone in the murder. Grace Jakes remarried following the death of Harold. In 1920 she married Sidney Kennedy. In 1938 he was granted a divorce on the grounds that she had deserted him. Her third husband was Arthur Thomas. On January the 24th, 1941, Grace's second husband, Sidney Kennedy, like Harold Jakes, was near Crystal Brook when he stopped to help the occupants of a car caught in a flash flood in Yakmurundi Creek. Although he could not swim, he dived into the swirling water and died in his rescue attempt. One woman perished also. He was posthumously awarded a Certificate of Merit by the Royal Humane Society for his bravery. But that is not the end of the story. Sydney Harold Don Jakes, the posthumous son of the murdered driver, became a part-time taxi driver himself. In 1959, at the age of 40, he too was murdered at work. His killer was also aged 25, just as Percy Budd had been. 28th of March 1959 was the eve of Easter. At Elizabeth, a suburb which did not exist at the time his father passed by the area on his last journey 4 decades earlier, a salesman of Flinders Park shot Jakes in the head with a .45 caliber pistol at about 8:30 p.m. His body was discovered the next morning on a building block, laying in a pool of blood. The killer, Raymond Thomas Kiker, was a native of Shepparton, Victoria, born in 1934, and who had married in 1953 before moving to Adelaide. A jury on the 18th of September found Kiker guilty, and he was sentenced to hang. On the 14th of October 1959, the death sentence on Kiker was commuted to life imprisonment with hard labour. He passed away on the 6th of October 2002, one day before his birthday, at Ararat, Victoria. One unusual aspect of the original crime was how it changed men's fashion. Budd wore a type of soft collar with a broad vertical stripe, like most young men at the time, which became known as a Budd collar during the trial. It went out of popularity rapidly, following the hanging.